A few months ago, Nintendo President Shuntaro Furukawa reiterated that the plan for the Nintendo Switch 2 to combat scalpers was simply to make sure there were enough Switch 2 units in stores to hold off any scalpers. Fast forward to the opening weekend of the Nintendo Switch 2, and seemingly this promise that the Nintendo president has made was clearly kept. They have indeed ensured that scalpers would not be able to flip the Nintendo Switch 2, or at the very least not as comfortably as they would have liked. Now, I think that was true for the first few days and also largely depends on your location. It seems like currently people are making some sales over on eBay, but even then when you consider the fees and the taxes that they paid to buy the consoles, many of these scalpers are not really turning as much as a profit as you would expect for the trouble they're going through. Definitely not in the kind of numbers that we're used to seeing when scalpers buy and flip consoles. Now, while eBay is generally a pretty good source to figure out how high in demand something is, it's also realistically the easiest place on the internet to flip something, primarily because many people view it as a very trustworthy selling source. And obviously, you don't have to worry about being within the vicinity of the seller, you don't have to worry about the risks that come with a face-to-face transaction, amongst all of the other circumstances that many people that are desperate for these consoles frequently thinking about before they purchase them. A good alternative indicator of how well something is selling would be some of the more local stuff like OfferUp and Facebook Marketplace. Generally speaking, scalpers will be quick to jump on those websites. I've been noticing for the past few days without even searching the word Nintendo that both Switch 2s and Switch 1s have been flooding the posts, at least in my area. The funny thing is the Switch 1s keep getting sold, but the Switch 2s just get their price slashed every few hours. Now, again, this might change going forward now that more people are starting to get the Switch 2s in hand and it's getting a little bit more difficult to find them in the stores. And we also have no idea of when retailers are going to put more up in stock. So there will be more people that have sacrificed their first weekend with a Nintendo Switch to maybe say, screw it, I want to play Mario Kart, and at that point they'd be willing to pay. Whatever the case may be, it seems like early on in the Switch's life, after a launch date, a launch weekend, it seems like it's true. The Nintendo Switch 2 is a non-scalpable or barely scalpable device at best. There have been enough units to meet demand for the most part. The question is, what exactly is the demand for the Nintendo Switch 2? As it stands, we have no real sources that indicate how many were sold or how many really were made available for sellers in the first place. But what is very clear to a whole lot of people is that almost everybody that wanted a Switch 2 was able to get their hands on a Switch 2. I have to add the word almost because there's always like those 3 people that show up and be like, I don't know why you guys are all saying this is in stock, it's sold out in every store in my area. And yeah, it's up in the air all around the country about whether or not it's in stock or not. And that's just strictly speaking about the United States. There are more people in Canada claiming that it's much easier to find one because of how ludicrously expensive it is over there. And then I swear in one of my last few videos, I saw back-to-back people saying, I don't know why you're saying it's sold out. In the UK, there are plenty available. Followed by the next comment saying, I don't know why you're saying it's not sold out. The UK has none available around me. So yeah, seems like it really largely depends on your location. I've said this a few times, but it seems like in the upper middle class to richer areas, you're more likely to have it sold out. The larger, more popular cities seem to have gotten more units and they've been the ones that sold out as well. But I also wonder who's going into stores, who's calling online, and who's speaking to the representative at the store. Because as it stands, retailers are actually going out of their way to make it more difficult for people to find out the quantity available at the specific store that you're asking for. A few Best Buys, for example, wanted the name and phone number of the person that was asking for quantity because they wanted to track who was asking. Meijer, a major retailer in the Midwest, will not tell you the amount of Switches they have in store. They require you to walk into the shop and go to the electronics section to figure it out. And many people have mentioned that when they've gone to Walmart or Target or whatever location they decided to go and check if they have inventory, they didn't see any out on the floor, but when they spoke to the representative, they were able to go to the back room and grab one. In addition to that, stores with memberships like Costco, for example, had stock and it lasted for quite a while. But the point is that while this may not be the case for everybody, in many locations, up until even today, Sunday, the 8th of June, if somebody really wants a Nintendo Switch 2 and they're willing to put in the time and the effort beyond just looking online to see if something's out of stock or picking up a phone and calling, they're realistically going to be able to find one. And again, I gotta reiterate that that won't be the case for everybody. If you're somebody that's driven around to 15 different stores and asked the representative and nobody's got anything in stock, I feel bad for you. Because even today, if I want a Nintendo Switch 2, I know that there is one within 20 minutes of me at least. But to bring the point back, The Nintendo Switch 2 is seemingly an unscalpable device, or at least it won't turn that big of a profit at the moment. And that's because Switch 2s are available. They've been available all weekend. They were extremely available on opening night. If you went almost anywhere, they were still readily available on day 1, day 2, and most of day 3. In fact, right now, about after 4 days, it's starting to feel like you might have to try a little bit harder to grab your Switch, but it's still not remotely as intense as it was in 2020. And it seems very obvious as to why this is the case. Demand has been met. The exact amount of people that wanted the Switch 2 have received their Switch 2. And for the ones that have not received their Switch 2 is out there. It's just in the wrong location. And as such, scalpers can't turn a profit. They can't sell it. They can't get anything out of it. Now, at this point, you'd think I'd kind of do a whole tongue-in-cheek thing where it's like, well, of course, scalpers aren't able to flip it. They met demand, and the demand wasn't actually that high. And that's why the scalpers can't make any money. And while that might be partially true, I think that's also has to do with why there is a low demand. Obviously, because the prices are high. And when the prices are high, the scalpers face a harder challenge. So now you have somebody out there trying to sell you a Nintendo Switch 2 at a scalped price. And that person is Shuntaro Furukawa. This has been in the talks, in the whispers, ever since 2020, when everybody saw what people were willing to pay in order to get their hands on a PlayStation 5. There was a clear understanding amongst the entirety of the gaming industry that this would be bad for the customer because it would be difficult to find the product you want without spending extra on it. And it's also bad for the gaming companies because they want to be able to get that money instead of these third-party scalpers. And if you know anything about Nintendo, you know that they want every penny for themselves in every which way, shape, and form. I made a joke that the president of Nintendo, Furukawa, found a way to combat scalpers, and it was by raising prices. But it wasn't really that much of a joke. It's reality. They're the type of company that would know that if they posted the Switch 2 for $350, it would easily flip and go for $500 from a scalper. They gotta know, because anybody knows that. And I genuinely think this is one of the measures they put into place to combat scalpers. Because at the end of the day, as everybody likes to point out, they're a business, they're a corporation. Why am I surprised that a business would be trying to make money? I'm not surprised. I'm disgusted, but I'm not surprised. So, yeah. At the end of the day, Nintendo was clearly able to combat scalpers by setting the right price and by having enough inventory readily available. The question is how long they can continue this for. How much stock is actually out there in the wild? How much of it has gone up for sale already? These are all unknowns. Because if rumors are to be believed and they've made all of these Switch 2s and they sent them all out ahead of time at one big moment and they all sold out, just instead of selling out on day 1 like every other console does, it took a few days to get there. Then what's next? Do they have another major shipment coming soon? These are just kind of questions, because if they don't have another major shipment coming soon, there is a big potential that the scalpers are going to start making their sales now. Or at least over the course of the next few days, maybe even a week, by the time nobody's able to get a Switch 2 and there's still people that desperately want their hands on one. Regardless, it'll be fun to keep an eye on how this scalper situation is going. Prior to this whole Switch 2 launch, prior to using this Furukawa statement as a reason to show that Nintendo was able to combat scalpers, it was an understood rule that you could gauge how much something is in demand based off of what it's moving for on eBay. And the fact that the Switch 2 barely makes a profit for scalpers means demand is met. The issue is, if that's all the demand there is for the Nintendo Switch 2, it's realistically not a very good sign for Nintendo. But as with everything else, we'll have to wait and see. All I can do right now is speculate, and as I've been saying for the past few days, this launch has been very weird. You know, when consoles usually make it out to the market, it's very clear that everybody wants their hands on these things. This is the first console launch that I remember where it does not seem like the case. And not because I'm in some kind of echo chamber, because I live in a place where there are Switch 2s available, and I've never seen that before. So yeah, this is just another thing to keep an eye on. Also, I don't know about anybody else, but I've been hearing a lot of people are returning their Switch 2s. That definitely might be an echo chamber on my end, but I am getting a lot of messages online, and I know a few people in person too that said they bought it, they played Mario Kart, they felt like the thing was too heavy, the battery life was too short, and they went back and returned it. I would say about 15 of them in the past hour alone have reached out to me in one way or another, which is not an indication of anything except for my own personal experience, obviously. It doesn't mean that all around the world there are millions of people buying the Switch 2s and going back to return it. It just means that this console is expendable. It is not scalpable. And look, scalpers are bad for us being the customers. But if you're cheering for a corporation and you think your product is the hottest thing on the market and it's going to be the best selling thing in the world and that's a part of your identity and you want it to happen, unfortunately, Scalper's success is generally directly proportional to that. And at least at the moment, the first 4 days in the console's launch, that's not the case. But as per usual, I will be keeping my eye on all of this stuff because I am genuinely interested in it, and anybody interested in following along, well, you know I'll be here. Thanks again for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.